Now, let's talk about modern therapy. We have talked about ancient wisdom. Remember, the ultimate end result of the Buddha's prescription is the total cessation of suffering. All psychological, emotional, and bodily samsaric suffering. Total cessation of suffering. But modern therapies, particularly psychotherapy, is not so much concerned about the total cessation of suffering. They are more specific in nature. They are more interested in wanting to relieve the patient or the client of his or her specific form of suffering. But nevertheless, they also make use of the principles that we talked about. What are they? I'm going to deal with just a few types of therapies today because there are so many nowadays in the world. I'm going to talk about mind-body medicine, and then cognitive behavior therapy, schema therapy, mindfulness-based stress reduction therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. And if we have time, maybe we'll talk a bit about quite an extraordinary woman who's not trained as a psychotherapist or didn't receive any formal training, but she also discovered the basic principles of how the mind works and got herself awakened. And she also came up with something which is also very simple and very applicable. Her name is Byron Katie, and her work is called The Work. If you are interested, you can go to the internet, just look at The Work, and you can see what it's all about. Okay, now let's talk about mind-body medicine first. Mind-body medicine uses the power of thoughts and emotions to influence body and health, because they believe that our thoughts and emotions have a very strong influence on our body and our health. And modern scientists, neuroscientists as well as biochemical scientists have proven that our mind is so closely related to our body. Any emotion that arises in the mind will immediately trigger off the glands in our body to produce biochemicals. And depending on the quality of your thoughts, whether they are positive or negative, whether they are wholesome or unwholesome, you will be affected accordingly. If it's unwholesome thoughts, then you will feel miserable. You will feel congested. In your chest, you'll feel burning sensations throughout the whole body, tension here and there, and maybe nausea, headache, miserable. All sorts of miserable sensations can be felt in your body because of your thoughts and emotions. And because of that, that can also lead to ill health. Now, talking about psychosomatic problems, maybe I could give you some facts and figures. It seems that in any year, almost 30% of the adult population will suffer from a recognized psychiatric disorder. These are findings from peer-reviewed papers. And then the World Health Organization estimates that depression is currently the fourth biggest, most costly, and most debilitating disease in the world. And by the year 2200, it will be the second biggest. In any week, 1/10 of the adult population is suffering from clinical depression, and 1 in 5 people will suffer from it at some point in their lifetime. Furthermore, 1 in 4 adults at some stage in their lifetime will suffer from drug or alcohol addictions. More startling and sobering is the fact that almost 1 in 2 people will go through a stage in life when they consider suicide seriously and will struggle with it for a period of 2 weeks or more. Scarier still, 1 in 10 people at some point attempt to kill themselves. This comes from a research done in 1995. In addition, consider the many forms of psychological suffering that do not constitute clinical disorders, such as loneliness, boredom, alienation, meaninglessness, low self-esteem, existential angst, and pain associated with issues such as racism, bullying, sexism, domestic violence, and divorce. So, although our standard of living is higher than ever before in recorded history, psychological suffering is all around us. So it is so prevalent in our society now. Despite all our technological advances, there is so much suffering. So many millionaires are committing suicide and getting addicted to drugs. So that's why modern therapies are now booming because of so much psychological suffering. And what is the earliest psychology that we have? It's found in Buddhism, Buddhist psychology, the study of how the mind works and how it affects the body. Okay, so this mind-body medicine uses the power of thoughts and emotions to influence body and health by doing what? First of all, they ask you to relax your mind and body. And by relaxing your mind and body, this will reduce your stress hormones. When your stress hormones are reduced, then your immune system will improve. It's all natural principle, nothing secretive about it. It's people discovering it. If you are objective enough, you'll discover it. It is there. It is the law of nature. Then, of course, with improved immune system, you will have better health. In fact, there are some people who say that Louis Pasteur, who discovered pasteurization, who started on this theory of bacteria being the cause of disease, is not really quite correct. Because there's bacteria all over the place, everywhere. It's your immune system. If your immune system is not strong enough, you will succumb to them. If not, there's no problem. When I was in Burma, I had a lung problem. I was coughing out blood stains in my phlegm. And one time, actually, a lot of blood from my lungs. So I was sent to TB units and TB specialists, although they never found any TB germs in me. That was the best that they could do. So one of the TB specialists told me they have actually special TB clinics in the major towns in Burma because it's so prevalent in Burma. And this TB specialist told me that in Burma, 95% of the population have got TB germs in their lungs. It's just that their immune system is good, so they don't get it. So if you want to go to Burma, make sure that your lungs and your immune system is good. Okay, there are certain techniques that they use to achieve this result. One is called biofeedback. Biofeedback is a way whereby they rig you up to a machine, and then they can monitor certain functions, certain involuntary functions like your breathing, your pulse rate. They'll let you look at the abnormal rate, and then they will also tell you certain ways of how to deal with it, how to conduct yourself so that you can voluntarily control the involuntary actions. Lower your breathing rate, lower your pulse rate. They give you certain exercise to do, and then you can monitor yourself in this machine. That's called biofeedback. And that can also help you to reduce stress or to calm down your body and your mind. They also make use of other relaxation techniques and cognitive behavior therapy. Now, let's look at some of the relaxation techniques that they use. One is called visualization, which is very common in Buddhist meditation. In the Tibetan tradition, it's even more common. They visualize very, very complicated pictures of the wrathful deities or the bodhisattvas and so forth, in full color and in great detail. Whereas the Theravadan Buddhists are very simple. They just visualize a kasina, just a disc of plain blue or plain yellow or plain white or just light. Or you could visualize people when you're doing loving kindness meditation. You visualize people and visualize them smiling and happy, and then that makes you feel good. This sort of visualization also helps you to relax. Another thing they do is body awareness. Body awareness means just bringing your attention back to your body, being aware of the sensations in the body. For example, right now you're sitting there listening to me. You can also be aware of your body, right? You may not be aware of it before I told you, but the moment I tell you, you can be aware that you are seated there, there are many sensations in the body. And this is actually very grounding, because many people tend to get lost in their thoughts, their projections, their impressions, their perceptions. And when you get lost in your thoughts and perceptions, that creates a lot of emotion in you. And the more you think, the more angry. The more you think, the more jealous. The more you think, the more conceited. So if you get caught up in the thoughts, then there's no end to it. You're going to suffer more. So one thing is to let go of your thoughts. Don't think and be aware of the body. That will curtail your thinking and shorten your suffering. Next one is progressive muscle relaxation. Some people don't know how to relax. So they teach you, okay, tense up. Like, for example, tense up your face like that. And then relax. Then they know how to relax. You tense up your muscles. And then relax. Okay, that's progressive muscle relaxation. Some people are so stressed up, they don't know how to relax because they are stressed all the time. So you purposely make them more stressed and then ask them to let go. Then they know how to relax. So they do that progressively from the top of your head down until your toes. That's called progressive muscle relaxation. That also helps you to stop you thinking, right? Because you're so busy trying to relax, you forget all about the things that are worrying you. Another one is transcendental meditation. It was very popular in the West in the early 70s, but now it's not so popular. There was a time when Eastern spirituality was growing in the West, and some of the Indian teachers who went there were very fluent in English, so they could communicate with the people there, and they also had very good results. Transcendental meditation is basically about repeating a mantra in your mind again and again, and that also, because it distracts your mind from any other thoughts, it will also give you tranquility, peace, and you can get very high. But nowadays, it's been replaced by mindfulness. Mindfulness is more down to earth and not getting lost in some concept, and with your eyes closed, you can actually do it in your everyday activities. Another way of doing it is by hypnosis. Some people are very prone to hypnotherapist suggestions. They're very compliant, and when the hypnotherapist asks them to relax, they can follow instructions and go into very deep states of relaxation. And sometimes they can even access normally inaccessible memories of childhood or even past lives. Then another thing is spirituality. Many studies have found that cancer patients who are terminal cases tend to live longer and live in more comfort, in a better state, if they have some spiritual leanings, spiritual affiliations. They believe in God, they believe in the law of karma, they believe in Amitabha Buddha or Kuan Yin, then they feel that their life is not as bad as someone who doesn't believe in anything. Right, so spirituality also helps. I think you must know of many, many testimonials of Christians or even Pure Land Buddhists or followers of Kuan Yin can tell you that by invoking their God or deity, they get solace when they are in trouble. And sometimes they are even saved from very dangerous situations. I can tell you one little story about one of our Buddhist devotees in Malaysia. He's actually a scholar. He went to take his master's in Buddhist studies in Australia, but he's also Chinese educated. So one day he went to Taiwan, and he's more of a Theravadian who is more interested in Pali and early Indian Buddhism. But he just wanted to find out more about Pure Land Buddhism. So he went to Taiwan and he went to stay in a place, and he argued with the Pure Land monk there. But the monk told him, don't worry, don't have any doubts. Just repeat Namo Amitofo, Namo Amitofo. Don't worry, just do it. Of course, that was against all his logic, because he's a scholar. He knows that this Amitabha Buddhism came in very, very late in the history of Buddhism, and he knows it's all a creation. But still, he just wanted to find out what it's all about, so he just followed instructions and did that. So one day, he went to an amusement park and he was riding on a roller coaster. And then suddenly, as he came down, he got such a shock. And then, at that moment, automatically, he started to recite, Namo Amitofo. And his fear disappeared. He's still a very staunch early Indian Buddhist, okay? But he says, sometimes there are things that we cannot explain. So spirituality is important, no matter what you believe, as long as it's something that gives you positive feelings, not something that harms you or harms society, but it helps you in situations like that. Why not? Okay. This is something quite revolutionary, because in the old days, the mainstream medical practitioners don't take spirituality into consideration. For them, it's all hocus pocus. Okay, the next thing that we're going to talk about is cognitive behavior therapy, right? The third strategy used by the mind-body medicine people. Cognitive behavioral therapy helps to change behavior, thinking and emotions by understanding and reorganizing their relationship. How do they do it? That's because thinking and emotions are very closely interrelated. People who think a lot will think first and then get emotional later. People who are very emotional will get emotional first and then think later. Most women are like that. They get emotional first and you ask them, why are you crying? I don't know, I just want to cry. But you ask a man, the man will start to think, and you're lucky if he sheds a tear. He will try to reason out and rationalize everything. The emotion will not come out. Okay? So it depends on where you're at, or whether you're an emotional guy or you're a rational woman. So they affect one another. You get angry, and then after that, the thoughts will come in, and you try to justify that or try to aggravate it. And if you have thinking, you perceive something, and then you start to have imaginings. Or maybe he's saying that in order to spite me. He may not be, but you're just thinking, and then you get all worked up for that because you believe in your thoughts. Okay, so thinking and emotions affect behavior. That's why if you have maladaptive behavior, then they try to find out the cause of your behavior. Is it due to emotions? Is it due to thinking? Is it due to both of that combination of thinking and emotions? And this is very much in accordance with the principles of nature, isn't it? The Buddha talked about the law of dependent arising. That things arise because of causes and conditions. Okay, let's look at other aspects of cognitive behavior therapy. Here, it emphasizes the present. This is where the word mindfulness comes into play, when they say be mindful, be in the present. They say don't get caught up in your thoughts about the past or the future. Be in the present, be aware of your senses. Be fully aware of what you're doing. And then the therapist will try to link the patient's behavior to his dysfunctional thinking. Many people are not aware of that. They don't know why they behave in certain ways. Most people don't. As Buddhists or as practitioners, it's very obvious to you, but if you're not a Buddhist, and they don't know why they behave in such a way. That's why they have to go to see therapists. And then the therapist will explain to them, your behavior is actually linked to the way you think, to your emotions. Next time these things happen, you try to do some homework, go back and draw a chart and write down the times or the occasions when you behaved in a strange way, and then try to find out and see what is the situation that caused that. So they try to change behavior by modifying the thinking. First, they will have to ask the patient to be more mindful. Next time that unusual behavior occurs, you must try to link that to a situation. What triggered off that behavior? There are two approaches. One is the cognitive and one is the behavioral method. Cognitive method is, like I mentioned just now, the therapist will explain to the patient how the behaviors are related to his thinking and emotions. Once the patient has seen that his behavior is due to the way he thinks, has emotional reactions, then the therapist will ask him, okay, how were you thinking when you behaved in such a way? Now, let me go through this first and I'll give you specific examples. Then he will identify and challenge the thoughts. Is this thought real or not? Is it true? Should it be believed in or not? And then he will try to convince the patient that the thinking, the line of thought, the thought pattern is not realistic and it should be challenged and you should replace it with more positive thinking. Okay, how does this happen? Let me give you a couple of examples. A depressed clerk felt very sad and useless as she thought that her boss hated her, as he did not acknowledge her as she passed his desk. This one is very common. You pass someone very familiar to you, your boss or your superior, he or she ignores you. Then something goes on in your heart. Hey, why is he ignoring me today? Did I do something wrong? Because I'm useless. So this lady had this thought that it's because her boss hates her. So the negative thought was, my boss hates me. And she believes that thought, and believing that thought, she feels very bad about it. So that's one of the ways that people feel upset because of misperception, and then believing that misperception. Then there's another case of somebody, he was sitting in front of the television the whole evening doing nothing. This guy is jobless, he has not been employed for a long time. And he felt very bad, very depressed. Then the thought arose in him, I will never get a job As I can't even do anything, I've been sitting here the whole day not doing anything, how can I ever get a job? So that sort of automatic thought that arose in him will aggravate the situation. He feels even more depressed because he feels that he is useless. So the therapist will try to ask this person to try to identify what are the things that trigger off his behavior, his emotions. Then they will try to locate and say it's faulty thinking, believing your wrong perceptions. So they will try to correct their perception. In this particular case, about this clerk who walked past her boss and the boss ignored her. Well, how do you know that the boss really hates you? Maybe because he's so engrossed in his work, he didn't notice you as you passed by. That could also be a very valid reason. And this guy who sat in front of the television the whole evening doing nothing, the alternative response, as he challenges this thought, is that really true that I can't do anything? There's no evidence because I have not really tried looking for a job yet. And anyway, I'm ill at the moment. But as soon as my illness improves, and if I start looking for a job, I may be able to get one. So it's like replacing these wrong thinking with more functional or more positive thinking. The behavioral methods are: 1, relaxation. We've talked about relaxation just now. Then distraction. A person is feeling very depressed or very angry. And when you're angry and overwhelmed by your emotions, it's not so easy to be mindful to see what triggered off that thing, because you're so caught up in your emotions. So what they do is distraction. In Buddhist meditation, we talk about changing the object of a meditation. Right? Here, it's like focusing on an object, and looking at the pen that is on your table and looking at it at various angles, just to distract your mind away from your thoughts, or looking at something else interesting. That's one way of doing it. Another way is sensory awareness, like I've been telling you. Bring your attention back to your senses, to what you hear, to your body sensations. And by changing the subject for your mind, then you will calm down instead of being agitated by the contents of your thoughts. This one is monitoring activities. Monitoring activities is for people who suffer from low self-esteem, or people who have false perceptions about themselves. Like, I'm a useless fellow, I can't really do anything well, I haven't done anything useful today. Some people just have that thought, And then the therapist will say, okay, are you sure that you are not able to do anything? Okay, go back and do a schedule of your daily life. Morning, what time you get up, what time to what time, what do you do? And after that, he will come to report to the therapist, and the therapist will go through the schedule with him and assure him, okay, see, you've done this, and you've done this, and you've done this, and how can you say that you haven't done anything? It's very strange, I have students like that. We find him very conscientious, very hardworking, and doing things very efficiently, but he himself doesn't see it that way. He feels that he's not up to standard, and he's lazy, he's not doing things well. That's his own perception. So when you go to this therapy, you have to prove to them, okay, from this time to this time you did this. You see, so many things you did, and you completed all your tasks. And nobody wanted to do this, but you volunteered to do this. You see how good you are? You have to try to convince them. But it's not so easy, because something is embedded in their subconscious. So scheduling activities is to make them more useful. And they feel that, okay, since you say that this period you're not doing anything, so next time you try to do something more useful during this period. So this one involves a lot of homework. People who have a high literacy rate can do it, I guess, in the UK or in the States. And then they have graded tasks for people who are depressed. One of the symptoms of being depressed is that you just don't want to do anything. Even those things that you used to like doing, you don't like to do anymore. So graded tasks is try to revive the interest by asking them to do just a little bit a day, and then increasing the amount of time to get them back into the old interests. Now, another subset of cognitive behavior therapy is schema therapy. Just now I told you about this case of a person who does not believe that he can really do anything well. And even if you tell him that he's wonderful, he's considerate, he's conscientious, he's hardworking, he would not believe it. Why? Schema therapy works on this assumption that childhood and adolescent traumas are the most likely causes of borderline personality disorder and similar problems. Borderline personality disorder is that this person is not really a psycho, but he's not really normal either. is a borderline. Because sometimes, for no apparent reason, somebody may say something and they could trigger off a very violent reaction in him. Inexplicable violent reaction. He can throw into a fit of anger. And people are shocked. What did I say? What did I do? I just said a single word and then he just erupted. So they say, through their research, they found that some of these people, it's because of some traumas that were embedded very deeply in their subconscious when they were young kids. So, how do they access this? Short of hypnosis, how do they access these early childhood maladaptive schemas that were embedded in their subconscious? Well, let's look at what is a schema first. A schema is a broad, pervasive theme regarding oneself and one's relationship with others, developed during childhood and elaborated throughout one's lifetime. For example, when you're young, you may have very dominant and authoritative parents, very critical, and they're always criticizing you. No matter how well you do any task, they're not happy. They always criticize you. And because of that, that gets embedded in your subconscious. When you grow up also, somehow you become a very critical parent. It grows in you. It's like you say, a chip of the old block. It transfers to you, and then you have this sort of behavior towards your children. It's very bad for them. And you yourself don't realize it. So sometimes it's worse than that, like I said just now, Someone could say just a wrong word and then you could just erupt. Because that word was spoken by your parents when you were very young, at a time when it was very traumatic. The moment that word or that action is sensed, somehow or other, it triggers off the subconscious and the person erupts. So how does schema therapy work? Their approach is they try to replace these maladaptive schemas with more healthy ones. And the method is by building trust and care between the therapist and the client. And then they will teach the client or the patient self-examination and self-discovery, which is actually looking back at your thoughts. Every time these things happen, you try to look back at what is happening. And then you try to identify the roots of your disorder. And before that also, they have another intermediary method, which is to stop the patients from using habitual, abnormal or harming coping styles with their maladaptive disorder. There are certain eruptions or the way they behave. Maybe I can give you a couple of examples here. Okay, this one is one of the identified schema modes. This is the angry child mode. This mode is fueled mainly by feelings of victimization or bitterness, leading towards negativity, pessimism, jealousy, rage, and so forth. While experiencing this schema mode, a patient may have urges to yell, scream, throw or break things, or possibly even self-injury or harming others. The angry child is enraged, anxious, frustrated, self-doubting, feels unsupported in ideas and vulnerable. Give you something more concrete. Abandonment or instability, a sense of being abandoned and very unstable. The perceived instability or unreliability of those available for support and connection. This involves the sense that others will not be able to continue providing emotional support, connection, strength, or practical protection. Your spouse or your partner or your friends. Because they are emotionally unreliable or erratically present, because they will die imminently, or because they will abandon the patient in favor of someone better. This comes about because when he was a child, he was abandoned by the parents. And because of that, this fear is always there, Even with present relationships with friends, the fear of being abandoned is there, and because of that, it clings on very tightly to their partner. And it can be very, very unsettling for the other partner, see so much clinging. So some of these things relate back to childhood. When you try to do the previous one, cognitive behavior therapy, and it doesn't work, sometimes you have to go deeper to look into childhood memories. This also can be very effective if you have done mindfulness practice before. You're a meditator. Remember in the sutta that we talked about just now when we defined what is right mindfulness, we talked about repeated observation of Dhamma as Dhamma. And one of the subsections of that is understanding the mind and understanding mind objects. You understand the mind, you understand mind objects, you understand the defilements that arise on account of these two. When your mind comes into contact with a mind object, which could be your thoughts, your memories of the past, then certain defilements arise. Then you can see the interrelationship. You can see how they arose, and when they arise, you know how to handle them, and you also know how they will not arise again in the future, how you can prevent them from rising in the future. So this sort of psychotherapy is also embedded in our Satipatthana meditation. It's just that nowadays many Satipatthana meditation teachers hold the view that in order to do true vipassana, you must only watch ultimate realities, which are defined as Citta, Cittasika and Rupa. The Rupa means form, and Citta means mind, Cittasika is mental factors. Pure mental factors. You don't get involved in the contents of your thoughts, because contents of your thoughts are not ultimate reality. They are concepts. Because of that, they tend to push away thoughts. Don't investigate the contents of the thoughts. Don't investigate where these thoughts come from and how they are linked to past situations. Because you don't see that, you don't understand. You just push everything away. When you're on intensive retreat, you try not to think, because thinking is supposed to be bad. No, don't think. Just keep your mind blank and you be in the present moment. So you may be very peaceful and calm and have very interesting insights while you're on retreat. But when you get back to the world, back to square one, or even worse, and then your spouse will say, what's the point of going to meditate? When you come back, you are just as bad or worse than before. But actually, if you watch your thoughts, you will also know that the thoughts are conditioned phenomena. They are also sankharas. They come about because of many causes and conditions, whether in the present or in the past, whether in the immediate past or in the distant past. They are all also conditioned phenomena. So it's very important to understand how these things arise and how they can cease without remainder, if you can go to the root cause. One of my students, my assistant actually, Asma Kumara, he has been conducting adult Dhamma courses, very, very popular, because he's incorporating this schema therapy into meditation. They go through a period of meditation first. That's just pure meditation, just watching your mind to see how it responds or reacts to the six senses. And then after that, he will brief them on what are the common schemas that people get caught up in. Then he will guide them to actually look back at their thoughts, at their behavior, to see how disconnected to certain beliefs that they are clinging to. For example, being a perfectionist is also a form of schema, wanting to do things in a perfect way all the time, which is very unreasonable, because how can you be perfect? Because the end result would depend on so many constraints. So if you want to define perfect in a realistic way, you should say that given the various constraints, whatever that comes out at the end of it is the best and the most perfect. Then you will not suffer from feeling dissatisfied with the result. Okay, now we're coming to another one which is also very popular, called mindfulness-based stress reduction therapy. That was introduced in the United States about 25 years ago by Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, very famous psychotherapist, psychologist. I think he's also a psychiatrist, if I'm not mistaken. I just read a little booklet. He says that since he started this mindfulness stress reduction training programs about 25 years ago until now, more than 16,000 patients have gone through that and have benefited tremendously. And he says that you don't need to be a super yogi to be able to enjoy the benefits of mindfulness. And many of them are enjoying the benefits of mindfulness maybe at a lower level, as committed yogis or monks would be able to. This involves two aspects. One is a formal and one is informal. The formal techniques are body scan. Body scan means using your mindfulness to scan your body, being aware of the different sensations in the body. Sitting meditation, sitting quietly, watching your breath, watching your rising and falling, either doing focused awareness or non-focused awareness. Then mindful Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga is stretching, all these movements, but doing it mindfully. That also will keep your mind undistracted from the worries and concerns of your daily life. Then it also involves mindful walking, the formal walking meditation, like some of you might probably would know, doing it slowly and being aware of your movements. Then they also have informal techniques. These are mindfulness in daily living. But this one is trying to apply it in daily life and living as if life really mattered. Living as if life really mattered means you're trying to live in the present moment, not thinking about the future, not living for the future, but being fully present, being absorbed in what you are doing at the present moment without thinking of the future results. When you're walking to work, walking to your car, walking from the car park to your office, walking to the toilet, when you're walking, always try to be aware of the walking. And he says, particularly before you go to sleep, try to be mindful. Because when you're going to sleep, you're letting go of all the concerns of the day, isn't it? If you don't let go of the concerns for the day, how are you going to fall asleep? Right? So, as you let go of the concerns of the day, don't just let your mind drift away. Be mindful. Be mindful of your body sensations, of your breathing, or ask yourself, what is the mind doing? How does it get into sleep? I have one yogi who can do that, and she watches the mind so closely until she knows when it falls asleep. How it falls asleep, how consciousness slowly becomes dull and pop, it disappears. And the next thing she goes, when she wakes up, she'll be mindful. Because normally, the first thought that occurs when you wake up is the last thought that you are aware of before you fell asleep. If you're concerned with the problem, you're thinking of a certain problem and then you fell asleep, when you wake up, the first thing you remember is the problem that you were thinking about. So he says, try to be mindful before you fall asleep, so that when you wake up, you'll be mindful. And then also be mindful in your relationships when you relate to people. What your emotions, what your perceptions, what's going on in your mind, and in your responsibilities and tasks as well. And then stress and reacting to it. When there's stress in you, how do you react to the stress? Do you become more stressful? Or when you realize that there's stress in you, do you try to relax? Apply some of these techniques to relax, to alleviate the stress. Now, I would like to show you a little clip from a documentary that he gave in Google about how this mindfulness-based stress reduction therapy has helped some of the patients.
So you have a sense of the kind of work that's being done in this area. And just very briefly to say, with a whole bunch of medical patients going through the stress reduction clinic, who were medical patients, they had chronic pain conditions, heart conditions, and so forth, but they also qualified for clinically a mental health diagnosis in either anxiety or panic disorder. Okay, so they had that, a psychiatric diagnosis on top of the medical diagnosis. And you can see that, like if this is an anxiety scale, you have a step function down over the 8 weeks of the stress reduction clinic. People come to the hospital once a week, 2.5-hour class. In the 6th week, there's also a day-long silent meditation retreat. And so it's 8 weeks, 2.5 hours once a week, 45 minutes of practice every day. And you see a step function in anxiety. You also see a step function in depression. And then, I won't show you the data, but that goes out not just 3 months, but 3 years. So something people do in 8 weeks can have an effect on their lives 3 years down the road.
Did you see just now the graph? There was a really dramatic decrease in depression and in panic disorder. There's a certain degree of commitment involved in this mindfulness stress reduction training. It's an 8-week course, and you're supposed to sit formal meditation 45 minutes a day, 6 times a day for 8 weeks, and then to apply all these informal techniques in your daily life as well. So you can imagine, in this about 25 years after it was introduced in America, now there's many stress reduction clinics spread throughout the country, and also now in other parts of Europe as well, where more than 16,000 patients have benefited. In fact, right now, the National Health Service in UK is promoting this mindfulness stress reduction training in its website, and encouraging people to do that in their daily lives. The next one, which is the latest development, is called acceptance and commitment therapy, which I've talked about many times in many of my talks. To go over briefly. Now, acceptance and commitment therapy is a bit different from mainstream psychotherapy. and psychology because its assumption is a bit different. Mainstream psychologists assume that there is a human normality, that most people are normal. If you're abnormal, then you become neurotic or you become psychotic. But acceptance and commitment therapy assumes that the faculty of thought, the ability to think that we humans have, is itself destructive by nature. It's because of our thoughts, because of the way we perceive things, that make us suffer. And it is destructive by nature, it's not normal by nature. In fact, it is normal to be destructive. It's normal to suffer. And they say that this comes about because of identification with our thoughts, believing our thoughts. Like what the cognitive behavioral therapists say, you must challenge your thoughts. Don't believe every thought that arises. Because if you believe the thought, then you keep on proliferating it, it will cause you more suffering. They are also making use of some of these principles. Now I have modified the name of the principles a bit to giving it an acronym so that it's easier for us to understand and easier to remember. It's called Da-Bo-Pa. Alright, D-A-B-O-P-A, Da-Bo-Pa. D means to disidentify. Disidentify means, like what the Buddha says, whatever thoughts, emotions that you have, observe them just as emotions, just as thoughts. They are not you, they are not mine, they are not yourself. They are just thoughts. Thoughts are just based on certain things, perceptions, assumptions, ideas, belief systems. They're just thoughts that arise because of these causes and conditions. Don't go identify with them. Don't say that they are your thoughts. The thoughts arose because of certain causes and conditions. Then, you're supposed to accept. Suppose you have this thought, this perception that arose because, like what the case that we talked about earlier, this clerk walked past her boss and the boss did not acknowledge her existence, so she felt that he hates me, or I'm useless. She doesn't want to acknowledge me. Okay? And then because of that thought and because she believes in that thought, then she feels very upset. Right or not? When you feel upset, then you have miserable feelings, sensations in your body. And then she doesn't like these sensations. So if you try to push away these sensations, or try to push away those thoughts, that is a negative thought in itself, and it will produce even more miserable sensations. So what they are saying is, accept the sensations that have arisen because of this wrong thinking. Then also accept the thought as a thought. It's not you, it's not yours, it just arose because of causes and conditions. Accept the sensations that have arisen because it was caused by that thought, and don't go and aggravate it by saying, oh, I should not feel like that, it should not be like that, I don't want this. Then thirdly, he says, how do you do that? Because the tendency of the human mind is to get caught up in thoughts. How do you disengage yourself from your thoughts and to accept the sensations? He says, be present. Just be aware of the sensations. Feel. See how the sensations are like in your body and how it affects your body and your other senses as well. Be in the present moment. Then observe yourself, or rather observe not self for us. For them, because in psychology or in psychotherapy, their problem for their patients is that many of the patients do not have a stable sense of self, particularly people who are psychotic. Their sense of self is very disjointed. Because they are disjointed, they cannot function properly. So they say that instead of asking them to look at not self, like we Buddhists would say, they say, look at that as your perennial self. What is the perennial self? The self that is not changing. What is the self that is not changing? The observer. You see, you could be very angry, you could be very upset a moment ago, but if you are able to step back and look at the anger and just feel the sensations in the body, at that time, you're not angry. Right? At that time, you're not upset. You're just an objective observer. And then they say, okay, that objective observer is your perennial self. It's there all the time. Whether you're angry or sad or happy, if you can step back and go back to that self, that is your true self. The rest are all circumstances and events that come and go, but the true self is always there. Meditators who just observe objects without looking back at the observing mind can also come to that conclusion, that there is a witness, there is someone who is watching everything arising and passing away. But that watching mind, that someone, is not arising and passing away. So that's why it's so important not to just to watch objects, but watch the subject as well. Or you get caught up in the wrong view that there is a permanent unchanging self that is witnessing all events that are changing. But anyway, for patients who need to have a sense of self, that's what they are directed to look at, to take comfort in the fact that this observing self is there all the time no matter what happens. So don't worry about these transient events that will come and go. Okay, then after that, you don't just stop there. You have to act. After you have gone through this process of DABO, then you have to look at the values. What values do you have? What do you want to be in life? Do you want to be a good father? Do you want to be a good boss? And how would you like to relate with your family members or with your employees? Maybe you need to spend much more time with your children instead of just leaving them to the Indonesian maids and spending your whole time trying to make as much money as you can and having no time to enjoy it. So certain values that are important to you, you have to personalize it for yourself and then make use of these values to evaluate a situation and then act on it. Act with commitment. So acceptance and commitment therapy makes use of mindfulness too, because you have to be mindful to observe your thoughts and to observe the sensations that come about because of the thoughts. Okay? And they also try to get yourself out of the problems caused by your faulty thinking and to consolidate your values so that you can act effectively. Okay, as I said, maybe I could share with you another one about Byron Katie and the work. Byron Katie, as I said, is an American woman who is not a trained psychotherapist or trained in any way, not even any religion, but underwent several years of very deep depression whereby she just couldn't do anything, She was stuck in her room and didn't want to go out, depressed, didn't want to do anything. Then one fine day, if I remember correctly, as she was lying on the bed, a cockroach crawled on her. And of course, at first she reacted. And then she watched her mind and she found that, no, it's just a thought. And then she realized that it was her thinking that had caused her all the suffering. After that, she was awakened and she was a changed person. She wrote a bestseller called Loving What Is. And her principle is very simple, very similar also. It says if you have a thought about yourself or about somebody, some thoughts of dissatisfaction about yourself or complaining about somebody else. My husband doesn't love me. He doesn't spend time with me. He's always out and he comes back only to sleep and then goes off again. The whole day is not around. Okay, if you have such thoughts, then she said, ask yourself 4 questions. The first one is it true? Then the second question is it really true? Because we tend to justify, very easy we justify, and then you question yourself again, is it really true? Third question, how do you feel if you hold on to this thought? Okay, that he's asking you to look at your feelings already. When you hold on to this thought, how do you feel? You feel miserable, isn't it? You feel very dissatisfied and maybe indignant, and you're feeling hot and angry. And then he said, okay, what would you be without that thought? If you did not harbor that thought, if you did not believe that thought, how would you feel? It's a session of suffering, isn't it? It's the thought that's causing you the suffering. So it's very simple, This is also very simple principles of nature. It's what mind-body medicine is all about. It's how your thoughts and emotions affect your behavior. Because you're feeling angry, you're clinging to this idea that things should be other than what they are, and then you have all these thoughts, so much indignation in you. So the lesson is that we should always be aware of our thoughts. We should never simply believe every thought that arises in us, particularly those thoughts that cause us suffering. You don't really need a psychotherapist for that, If you practice Buddhist mindfulness, if you're constantly watching your mind the whole day, you will know how thoughts come and go. You will know how thoughts are formed. You will know how thoughts come about because of assumptions, belief systems, expectations. That if you really practice mindfulness and full awareness means being able to evaluate whether a situation or a thought is beneficial or not, whether it's suitable or not, whether it's relevant or whether it's realistic. And when you see that, you can immediately let go. I'm not saying that you get rid of all assumptions and expectations, because you need to survive in this world based on assumptions and expectations. But don't cling to them. They may not be accurate, they may not be realistic. So if you do things carefully, if you're always mindful and watching thoughts wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whenever you can, then that is the ancient wisdom that can still be applied today, as modern as can be, because it is a natural principle. It's a principle of nature. Anyone can discover it any time. It is perennial. It's never ancient or modern. It's always there, just for you to open up to it. So I hope tonight's talk will be able to help you to understand suffering when you next encounter it. Don't just push it away, understand it. Look at its cause. The cause is nothing else but craving, attachment due to ignorance. Abandon that cause and then achieve cessation of suffering.